Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into the beginning of dinosaurs' life. And honestly, the source material reveals a story that just completely shatters the usual myths. When most of us picture dinosaurs, right, we imagine these towering, earth-shaking titans dominating absolutely everything in sight, completely uncontested. But the actual origin of dinosaurs, it's this fascinating, kind of crazy underdog story. We're talking about survival on the absolute ragged margins of a harsh, unforgiving world. We're going to go back over 230 million years to uncover how a group of tiny, obscure reptiles actually managed to weather a literal global apocalypse and inherit the Earth. So let's just dive right in and shatter that popular image of giant reptiles ruling from day one. Because if you had a time machine and you zipped back to the Triassic period looking for a T-Rex, you'd be incredibly disappointed. You see, dinosaurs absolutely did not start at the top of the food chain. No way. The harsh reality of the Triassic world was that it was run by entirely different creatures. The real kings of this era? They were massive proto-mammals called synapsids. Think tusked dicynodonts, and these giant crocodile cousins called pseudosuchians. These were the absolute heavyweights, just throwing their immense weight around. To really wrap our heads around this, we need to look at the timeline. The Triassic period officially kicks off 252 million years ago on the supercontinent of Pangaea. Now, Pangaea was this massive, single landmass completely racked by extremes. We're talking grueling dry seasons, mega monsoons, and just wild swinging temperatures. But here is the defining detail. The first definitive dinosaurs, they don't even show up until around 233 million years ago. Think about that. That means for roughly the first 20 million years of the Triassic, dinosaurs literally didn't even exist. They were remarkably late arrivals to a world already packed with established, dominant lineages. It really sets up this classic David versus Goliath scenario, but, on a planetary scale. On one side, you've got the early dinosaurs. They're rare, they're living in the shadows, and honestly, most of them are about the size of a medium dog. And then on the other side, the giants, the pseudosuchians and synapsids. These creatures were highly diverse and featured these massive, 7-meter-long, heavily armored apex predators that essentially looked at early dinosaurs as a light snack. Dinosaurs were completely outmatched in size, in strength, and in numbers. Take Eoraptor, for example. This is one of the earliest known dinosaurs, found in 231-million-year-old rocks down in Argentina. This bipedal little guy weighed a meager 10 kilograms, stood barely a meter tall. Eoraptor was swift, lightly built, and mostly a carnivore, just darting around the underbrush, catching insects and small lizards. And all the while, it was desperately trying to avoid getting stepped on or eaten by the giant crocodile relatives that actually ran the neighborhood. It's just the absolute perfect example of their incredibly humble beginnings. Now, what's really fascinating about this early evolutionary divergence is how these underdogs were already laying the genetic groundwork for the future. We can actually map their rapid evolutionary split into the major clades that would eventually define the whole Mesozoic era. You see the split into theropods, that's the lineage leading to meat eaters and eventually modern birds. Then you've got the sauropodomorphs, destined to become the long-necked giants, and the ornithischians, the future horned and armored plant eaters. But remember, during the Triassic, all of these distinct world-famous lineages still basically looked like tiny, scrambling, two-legged e-raptors. And they stayed that way for an incredibly long time. For 30 million years, dinosaurs were absolutely not dominant. They were just living in the shadows. Recent studies actually tracking the morphological diversity of these animals found that the crocodilian-lined pseudosuchians were exploring twice as many ecological niches as early dinosaurs. They were trying out different diets, wild body armor, totally different ways of moving, all at double the rate of the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs basically had to just share their environment and scrape by on the absolute fringes. So here's the crucial takeaway. Dinosaurs did not evolve their iconic traits to become kings of the world. Nope. They developed this very specific evolutionary toolkit simply to survive. They were battling extreme droughts, massive wildfires, and fierce competition. Their upright leg posture and active bipedalism made them fast and efficient. Their high metabolisms allowed them to stay highly active. But it's those last 2 points, insulating protofeathers and malleable growth rates, that are going to become the biggest plot twist in this entire explainer. Let's zoom in on those protofeathers for a second. When we hear the word feathers, we naturally think of flight, right? But these simple kind of hair-like structures evolved primarily to just retain body heat. Because Pangaea was so massive, the climate was incredibly extreme. Dinosaurs found a niche living in the cooler, higher latitudes, places like modern-day China and Argentina, which were positioned much further north or south back then. While the giant, scaly pseudosuchians had to hibernate or sluggishly wait out the bitter cold winters, dinosaurs, wrapped up in these fluffy proto-feathers with their high metabolisms, could stay active and hunt all year round. I mean, they were basically wearing down jackets in the snow. Then, everything changes. About 201 million years ago, the end Triassic catastrophe hits. Massive volcanic rifts start tearing Pangaea completely apart, right at the equator. And guys, this wasn't just some local eruption. This was a global apocalyptic event. These volcanoes pumped absolutely staggering amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. The oceans acidified. But most importantly, the massive amounts of ash and gas physically blocked the sun, completely replacing that hot Pangaean climate with a sudden, devastating global volcanic winter that lasted for years. The sheer devastation of this event is just staggering to think about. 76% of all species on Earth were entirely wiped out. Those giant amphibians in the rivers? Gone. The massive synapsids? Gone. And the dominant, heavily armored pseudosuchians, those 7-meter giants that had ruled the Triassic with an iron fist, almost all of them perished. The tropical megafauna simply could not handle a sudden decade-long freezing winter. Which leads us to the ultimate question, doesn't it? If the biggest, baddest, most heavily armored animals on the entire planet were completely wiped out, how on earth did our small, seemingly outmatched dinosaur underdogs actually manage to live through this catastrophe? What exactly was their secret to surviving the deep freeze? Well, the source material reveals they got the ultimate lucky break. The very tools they evolved just to scrape by on the harsh margins of the Triassic ended up becoming the perfect shield against a volcanic winter. Those fluffy proto-feather coats, they kept the dinosaurs warm while the scaly giants literally froze to death. And those malleable growth rates? Well, if there was a sudden famine because the sun was blocked and the plants were dying, young dinosaurs could literally just hit pause on their growth to save energy. The massive dominant reptiles just couldn't adapt fast enough. The dinosaurs didn't outcompete the giants at all. They just happened to be wearing winter coats when the Ice Age hit. This brings us to a really brilliant point highlighted in the source material. Rather than driving the incumbent of a niche to extinction, they merely took over when the previous holder was wiped out. It's wild to think about. The surviving dinosaurs literally just walked right out of the freezing shadows and into a completely empty world. All that ecological real estate, the apex predator roles, the giant herbivore roles, was suddenly totally vacant. This tragic end of the Triassic is exactly what kicked off the golden age of the Jurassic, allowing dinosaurs to finally grow huge and completely take over the planet. And that leaves us with a truly mind-bending question to wrap things up. If not for a random chance volcanic winter 201 million years ago, would the dinosaurs have ever ruled the Earth? Or would we have seen 150 million years of giant land-running crocodiles and bizarre proto-mammals? It really shows us the incredibly fragile, chance-driven nature of evolutionary dominance. The ancestors of modern birds only got their chance to rule because they were small, fluffy underdogs who figured out how to survive the cold. Keep that in mind the next time you see a pigeon bobbing down the sidewalk. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible history of our planet.